Hello and welcome to the MudRoom, our weekly free and live uncommon sense parenting class. How's everybody doing today? It's been kind of a busy day. We had a bonus workshop in parentability, and while I was doing that, my husband and my kids luckily did a ton of yard work because the snow is finally gone around here. It's finally starting to warm up. So they did that while I hosted the workshop with the OT Butterfly, which was amazing. So yeah, that was fun. Before we get going this evening, hi, I'm Allana Robinson, and I'm a parenting coach for parents of toddlers, preschoolers, and kindergartners. I help you understand why your children are misbehaving and how to fix it without yelling, shaming, or time outs. If you're watching live, say hi, let me know that you're here. If you're catching this on the replay, throw a replay in the comments. Feel free to comment and chat as we go along. Let me know how you're doing. I really do want to know. Everybody is somewhere in a different boat in this collective storm, and I think it's important that we keep checking in with each other. If you aren't a member of the Parenting Posse yet, I invite you to join us so that when we're done here, we can continue tonight's conversation over there. So, uncommon sense parenting, as you may or may not know, is the process that we use, the structure that we focus on, is really aimed at children 2 to 6 years old. Why? Because we focus so much on skill building, self-regulation, and critical thinking. And before the age of 2, children's executive functions haven't begun developing. They really still need to co-regulate most of the time. And critical thinking just, I won't say it isn't possible yet, but it's a lot harder. It's a much more drawn out process. They're much more in the cause and effect stage still. And to be fair, most people won't need uncommon sense parenting before the age of 2 because kids before the age of 2 don't generally have that many behavioral struggles. They're babies. But I get a lot of questions from parents who recognize that basically every child will need to work on their skills, and they want to jump in and they want to start working on them right away. At least once a week, I get an email from a parent of a young child asking me when the earliest that they can register for parentability is, because they want that support. They want to build these skills from the ground up versus having to go back and remediate them in 1 or 2 plus-ish years. And I applaud them for that. It is so much easier to raise strong children than to go back and fix what's broken. That said, we don't want to put the cart before the horse. In that space between 1 and 2 years, there are so many developmental leaps and changes that happen. And just like academic creep, meaning focusing on academics before children are developmentally ready for them, it is possible to have skill creep too. So today I wanted to give some starting points for parents who have children under 2 years old who are chomping at the bit and want to get started with uncommon sense parenting now, so that when they're ready to join parentability and start skill building when their little one hits about 2 years old. So first thing that I would recommend doing from as early as 8 or 9 months is getting a time timer and get in the habit of using it. I'm not going to go over what a time timer is and how it works. I have a whole episode on that on my blog, so you can go check that out afterwards if you want more details on what exactly a time timer is used for. But I strongly feel that introducing a visual timer specifically, not just any old timer, a visual one, as early as possible is one of the best gifts that you can give your children. If you don't have a baby anymore and you're looking for a great shower gift, I recommend the time timer. It is my go-to along with a pack of Depends. I am never the most popular gift giver at the party, but the recipient always almost calls me later, generally crying, thanking me for my forethought. We want our kids to have an almost Pavlovic response to the time timer. We want that beep beep that it makes to mean something to them. We want them to understand that it indicates a transition. And when you introduce a time timer to a 2+ ish year old, there's always a bit of a bit of a breaking in period where you have to actively teach that child to trust the timer. There's always just a little bit of resistance to it because it's new. But when you introduce it to a baby, they have no resistance to it, which means that it's a lot easier to teach them to trust it, and it's a much more passive process. You can kind of just start to use it and refer to it without having to explain anything, because babies just take new things at face value. Everything is new to them. So you can set it when you're getting ready to go somewhere, set it when you're showering or doing your makeup so they can see how long it'll take you. Bonus is that it keeps you on track. I'm chronically late. My friends joke that I am incapable of being on time. I'm either 30 minutes early or 30 minutes late. But when I use a time timer for things like showering and doing my makeup and getting out the door, I am much better at staying on track. I often set one before the MudRoom on Tuesdays so that I don't get caught, messing with my hair or something when I should be on camera. Anytime you tell them, we can do that in 5 minutes, set the timer. If grandma and grandpa are coming over once this is all done, they're coming over in an hour, set the timer. It makes time so much more concrete for them. And then by time they're 2, this isn't a new thing. It's not something to rebel against. They inherently understand what it means and to pay attention to it. And therefore, it's much easier once they're 2 to make it a tool that you can actually use. So first tip, introduce a visual timer as early as possible. Second would be to use controlled choices as early as possible. Controlled choices are when you give a child 2 options that are both equally acceptable and available to them. So you might start this with babies by giving them choices of what shirt that they're wearing by, holding 2 of them up. They might not be able to say, I want that one, but they can point, or you can just follow their eye gaze. Usually they'll look at one versus the other. Same with babies who are starting to eat solid foods. Give them an option of which spoon they get, or which color bowl they use, or what food they're going to eat. Everybody knows that once they turn 18 months, they're going to start having very active opinions on those things. So you might as well establish now that they get 2 choices and they can pick between those 2 things. Again, it gets them used to the concept that there's just 2 available choices, and it gives them agency over some small aspects of their lives. And then around 14 months, you're going to transition to using the full logical consequence process, of which controlled choices are an aspect. But you're going to start engaging them in more active collaborative problem solving and seeking their input a little bit more actively, because either verbally or non-verbally, they're going to have stronger opinions, and they're going to be able to indicate those opinions a little bit more clearly. Again, they won't necessarily be able to verbally participate in the process, but you can watch their actions, they can point, they can demonstrate what it is that they want to do. Just because a child can't talk doesn't mean that they aren't communicating. And again, this eliminates that breaking in period that exists when we suddenly introduce this way of dealing with misbehavior at age 2. Generally, when my clients come into parentability and we switch the focus to skill building and they stop being authoritarian, it produces a bit of an extinction burst. And then they have to weather that before they can really get down to skill building. So by introducing this process really early, even if you have to do, the whole process all the time, which you generally will with a nonverbal child, it really eliminates that transition period once they get closer to 2. Which brings me to tip number 3, and that's facilitating communication. Expressive communication is generally a year behind the development of receptive language, which means that they can understand and they can think much more complex thoughts than they can necessarily make verbally come out of their mouths. And as someone who has taught my own sons to sign and worked with a ton of other young children who sign, it's actually really amazing how complex the thoughts that young children have are. They just typically can't communicate them. So one of the biggest gifts that you can give your child is a way to communicate with you that doesn't rely on verbal words. And whenever I talk about this, a lot of parents get kind of squirrely because they think that by giving their child a way to communicate non-verbally, it's going to delay their verbal language. And you can rest easy, there is no evidence that that's the case. In fact, the evidence points to the opposite. Children who know that they'll be understood with or without verbal words are much more likely to try to talk earlier because there's a lot less pressure. So how do we do this? With sign language and visuals. Signing Time by Rachel Coleman is, as far as I'm concerned, the best thing in the whole wide world. It was the only TV that I allowed my kids to watch for a very long time, and my kids still love them, even though now they refuse to sign. Watch them with your kids. The Baby Signing Time series is fantastic for those basic signs that you need for babies. Use them, hand over hand teach them. At 15 months, my oldest was signing basic sentences like, mommy hungry. Mommy, go away, playing. Mama, where daddy? Mama, stay, me, go outside. It just made every day so much less of a struggle. We also had visuals that he could use. Again, make those controlled choices about his food or which park we were going to go to, or if he wanted me to get the car toys or the blocks out for him. No development can be achieved without some form of communication. So facilitate that. It'll make your life so much easier once they turn 2. And suddenly they go through this massive developmental leap, and suddenly all those executive functions are wiring up. They can talk a lot more, but they have that fallback method if things get too overwhelming and they're just not able to communicate their thoughts verbally. They'll know that there's a backup way that they can still make themselves understood, and that reduces frustration a lot. And finally, who is surprised by this? If you are, you're new around here, and that's okay. But start teaching independent play. From the moment that they're sitting unassisted, do not be in their face all the time entertaining them. Start the process of setting them up in a safe environment with some toys and walking away. It doesn't have to be far away, but just out of their line of sight. Start getting them comfortable with exploring toys without you being right there, without always being able to see you. If they cry, you can pop your head back in, smile, reassure them, and then go back to doing what you were doing. Again, it's a lot easier to establish this when everything is new and novel and they have no expectations, and they can get absorbed in watching, how the light makes patterns on the ceiling when the blinds are closed. Then when they're 2 and they're trying to use increasingly complex toys and tools, and they have expectations about where you're going to be, and when those expectations aren't met, it can start to give them a little feeling of insecurity. It's a lot easier to make them feel safe at 8 months than it is at 2 years. And if you can get an 8-month-old comfortable with being by themselves when you're around but not right beside them, then it's a lot easier to maintain that and to gradually lengthen it out as they get older. By 2, we're generally hoping that they can go for 30 minutes to an hour of independent play. Well, if we start that process at 10-minute intervals when they're 8 months old, we've got a lot more lead time to work up to that. The pressure is very much reduced. Same with independent sleep. We want our children to feel safe sleeping in their own space from an early age, because that means there's basically no pushback when they're a little bit older. It gives us a lot more lead time so that it's not suddenly that they're 3 and we're so far past sleep deprived that we snap and we have to impose some firm boundaries really suddenly. It can be a much more gradual process the earlier we start. And even then, often they don't need that process because they feel secure and safe without someone beside them all the time. So start that process when they're babies and all squishy and really just agreeable. I miss this stage. I've had baby fever a lot lately. So if you can do those 4 things, introduce the timer, start using controlled choices, facilitate that 2-way communication, and teach them that they're safe by themselves, by time they turn 2 and we're ready to start working on skill building and self-regulation and critical thinking, there's literally no remedial work to do. You're not trying to teach self-monitoring and teaching them to trust the timer. You don't have to teach emotional control and verbal communication. You're not trying to teach organization and controlled choices. You're not trying to teach independent play and self-regulation. It spreads all of that out over the first 2 years of their life so that they can focus on skill building once they're 2 and just really focus on honing them. Does that sound doable? If you have a child under the age of 2, I'd love to know which of these you're going to focus on more in your day-to-day life. Can you see where you can make some tweaks that will really set your little one up for success and make sure that they're ready to start skill building and for you to join us in Parentability once they hit their 2nd birthday mark? I'd love to hear your thoughts and to continue the conversation in the Parenting Posse. If you aren't a member yet, the link is in the description and we'd be thrilled to have you. We have over 7,000 members and we're all working towards that same goal of well-behaved kids, and we would love to meet you. So thank you so much for being here with me today. Have a great week, and I'll see you next Tuesday for another Uncommon Sense Parenting class. Bye.